Imagine you are walking through a forest at twilight. The air is heavy, the light is fading, and you are profoundly physically exhausted. You aren't just tired, you are consumed by a melancholy that feels as much a part of your body as your breath. This is where we find Poliphilus, the protagonist of Francesco Colonna's 1527 masterpiece, the Hypnerotomachia Poliphili. He is wandering through a dark, disorienting landscape, driven by a singular, aching desire for a woman named Polia. He is so spent that he eventually collapses under the shade of an oak tree, and as he drifts into a deep sleep, the world around him begins to transform into something far more complex than a simple dream. When Poliphilus wakes, he finds himself in a valley that feels less like nature and more like a vision. He discovers a massive, decaying architectural complex that stretches across two mountains, a structure so grand it seems to defy the laws of physics. He sees a colossal Medusa head and a massive frieze depicting the Gigantomachy, the battle between the gods and the giants. To a man of the Renaissance, these ruins weren't just old buildings. They were a source of profound awe and a painful reminder of the lost knowledge of the ancients. He wanders among lifelike bronze horses and a massive elephant containing mysterious tombs, marveling at the mathematical precision of the stone. He looks at these ruins and feels a sense of tragedy, thinking that the builders of his own time could never hope to replicate such perfection. But this beauty is not constant. The sublime architecture is periodically interrupted by the wild, encroaching forces of nature. Poliphilus's wonder turns to terror when he encounters a monstrous dragon. It is a sudden, jarring shift from aesthetic contemplation to existential dread. He finds himself fleeing through dark, labyrinthine interiors, gripped by the terrifying thought that he might never find Polia, that he might be lost in this dream forever. Eventually he follows a flickering light out of the darkness and into a sunlit, fertile valley. The atmosphere shifts again. He finds a magnificent fountain where a nymph sleeps, and the landscape begins to feel less like a trap and more like a sanctuary. He is approached by a group of singing nymphs who calm his fears and promise him that Polia is within his reach. They lead him to a lavish bathhouse where, after a series of playful encounters and the use of medicinal herbs to soothe his rising frantic passions, he is presented to the majestic queen Eleutherilida. The queen's court is a place of total sensory and spiritual overload. It is a world of perfect mathematical symmetry where every movement and every decoration is governed by astrological symbolism. Everything is choreographed. He witnesses a highly ritualized banquet of such extreme opulence that it feels almost overwhelming, and he watches a magnificent chess game played by 32 nymphs. In this court, the chaos of the forest is replaced by a rigid, celestial order. From this court, Poliphilus is led toward a labyrinthine water garden, consisting of 7 concentric mountain circuits. This isn't just a walk through a garden, it is a grueling physical and spiritual trial. As he navigates the water, the currents become more difficult and the air grows foggy and ominous. The labyrinth serves as a series of allegories. Through the architecture and the hieroglyphs carved into the stone, he begins to learn the importance of the middle way, the idea of finding a balance between extremes, between industry and idleness, and between passion and reason. As he nears the center of this labyrinth, the challenges become moral. He passes through gates that represent different human states, poverty, strength, and a deceptive, alluring form of lust. He is nearly led astray by the temptations of the third gate, struggling to maintain his focus on Polia amidst the overwhelming sensory distractions. Finally, a beautiful nymph carrying a torch appears. She leads him through a series of magnificent triumphal processions, where ornate chariots move through a landscape of eternal spring. These processions are like living myths, moving through a world where the cruelty of Cupid has been replaced by a more graceful, structured form of courtship. The journey reaches a peak of intense, almost agonizing passion. Poliphilus becomes lost in the contemplation of the nymph's beauty, caught in a struggle to understand if she is a mortal woman or a divine being. But just as his passions reach a breaking point, the dream reaches its resolution. Polia herself appears. Her presence acts as a stabilizing force. She doesn't just satisfy his desire, she tempers it. She transforms his scalding, chaotic passion into a state of patient, renewed hope. The Odyssey ends not with a frantic chase, but with a sense of spiritual resolution. If we step back from the plot, it becomes clear that the Hypnerotomachia Poliphili is much more than a strange, surreal adventure. It is an allegory of the lover's soul. The entire journey, from the dark forest to the celestial court, and finally to the presence of Polia, is a map of the psychological and spiritual movement of a person in love. One of the most striking things about Colonna's work is how it uses architecture to talk about morality. In the Renaissance mind, there was a deep connection between the symmetry of a building and the integrity of a human soul. The mathematical precision of the ruins Poliphilus finds suggests that the universe has an inherent order, and that the goal of a virtuous life is to align oneself with that order. When Poliphilus navigates the labyrinth, he isn't just walking through a garden, he is navigating the complexities of his own character. The gates he passes through are the different impulses that a person must master to find their center. This brings us to the central tension of the book, the struggle between earthly desire and spiritual ascent. This is a classic Neoplatonic theme. Poliphilus is constantly caught between his physical sensory cravings, his burning passion, and his desire to reach something higher, something divine, represented by Polia. The book asks whether love is something that consumes us and leaves us wandering in a dark forest, or something that can be refined and used as a ladder to reach a higher state of being. We also see a constant interplay between nature and artifice. There is the wild, unpredictable, and often terrifying nature of the forest and the dragon, and then there is the highly structured, idealized, and mathematical world of the Queen's Court and the Water Garden. This reflects a Renaissance preoccupation with the idea of man's ability to impose order on the chaos of the natural world through art, science, and architecture. The dream world of the book is a place where these two forces are constantly colliding, forcing the protagonist to find his way through the tension between the wild and the structured. The concept of the middle way is perhaps the most practical lesson hidden within the allegory. The labyrinth is a physical manifestation of the need for moderation. If Poliphilus had succumbed to the extremes of despair in the forest or the extremes of lust at the third gate, he would never have reached the center. The book suggests that the path to enlightenment, or even just to a healthy love, requires a balance. It requires the industry to move forward, but also the wisdom to know when to pause. It requires passion, but also the reason to keep that passion from becoming destructive. In many ways, the Hypnerotomachia Poliphili is a book about the process of becoming. Poliphilus starts the dream as a man who is a victim of his own emotions, wandering aimlessly and exhausted by his own longing. By the end, through the trials of the labyrinth and the guidance of the nymphs, he has been transformed. He hasn't just found the woman he was looking for, he has found a way to exist in relation to her that is balanced and stable. It is a dense, difficult book, filled with symbols that have been debated for centuries. But at its heart, it remains a deeply human story about the disorientation of desire and the long, winding path toward finding one's center. It's a reminder that the journeys we take in our minds, or in our dreams, are often just reflections of the internal work we are doing to find our way through the complexities of living.